it's pretty clear when you look at the context in which it's written.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
In my, and I also, this is just my feeling. But if you say, well, we're going to, again, it comes back to this question: what are going to be the criteria for developing the system? Because if you say the criteria is that it's okay to develop something because it'll look okay as long as it looks okay within a context.
Yeah.
You're always going to come up with a context.
I think that's a conversation we need to revisit in January.
But also the other thing with that particular symbol is if I saw a short fixed length that looked like a fixed length becoming forward,
right,
I would think successive forward. If it was a long one that went to forward, I think, oh, approaching forward.
That's right.
Middle, whatever.
Yeah, right. Good, good.
So the length of the symbol changes the, I mean, even in the context, same context, if the symbol's short, I would jump to, it means something different than if it's long.
And do not put in succession and there's no symbol, if I recall correctly, for succession. Successive in your move.
In your move, there is.
There is a limitation. So again,
yeah.
is the symbol that's being used in law notation going to be used in your?
Well, do we have symbols for simultaneous and things like that? Simultaneous, successive, and sequential?
No, we don't.
Well, some of these things just have. That's a different.
Used,
I think we need to have symbols. For those, anything we teach, which is we teach as part of body phrasing, then we should have symbols for it.
Absolutely.
Just don't have
simultaneous.
Yeah,
and it should be different from the the other symbols that we're using.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
They have other meanings.
Well, what we're doing, this is kind of getting into the real theoretical aspect of how many symbols do we want to create, or do we want to use the symbols we have to show something?
Let's use what we have as much
Right,
It's
yeah.
possible. I agree too. Absolutely. And I think,
I mean, we'll say sequential by overlapping the actions.
Right. I mean, sequential, simultaneous, and overlapping happen to me by the arrangement of the symbols, but I don't have the
you already have something
understanding.
to show as action.
Right.
You just wanted to say that you
Talking
wanted,
about just as a concept.
as a concept,
right.
you wanted to do a prescriptive,
Exactly.
do
Yeah.
movement that's
Right.
simultaneous, do movement that's successive, do movement that's sequential.
Right.
And
Well, you could do
That's a
overlapping
good
action
question.
strokes.
But you could, but then, well, I'm just reiterating, but you see a dance, you say, oh, this is about simultaneous versus succession. Then I have to write a bunch of action strokes. I'm implying duration, I'm implying the number. What if I just want to have a symbol that says, first they were successive, and then they were simultaneous?
yeah, I agree.
Okay, I think we should get back to the
Move on.
chart. I think we're making Ilene crazy over here.
What was your next one? So for 10, I've added outflowing, and we've got all kinds of other notes.
Yeah. Under 12 and 13, I just wanted to say that we would be teaching the first one in that sequence.
Where? Which number?
12 and 13. Just in case anybody wanted to know, I don't know if anybody's...
So usually it's one, the first one for any amount, any form.
Yeah.
And do you understand what the
Because the
problem
issue
is?
was, for some people, that looked like 1 degree of any form.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a way to show a small amount of any form.
Well, see, when we're using, we're trying not to be that specific in a way. I mean, we're going for the most general statements, I would say, because there's a point to me at which you could put some other, I don't know, I haven't done enough thinking about it because I don't do that kind of specific. If it gets too specific, then I just notate it in law notation.
It's
Yeah, I know, but yours is from a prescriptive point of view in relation to working with kids, right?
well, it could be, the question is not, we started the thing with, last meeting with applications, and then here again, does one want to develop motif notation? I mean, the question is, so because it's going to be mainly used in certain applications, or what, so the system fits many different applications. I mean, that will influence then if you're going to just have general symbols, or if you're going to have symbols that make more specific statements.
Well, you could, I would think, put in any degree of flexion on these things.
Well, this was what the second one was. This was, the point was when Anne had in your move, the first symbol implies an amount, a small amount, as opposed to.
If you look at number 14,
Yeah, I see.
which is not quite right, I don't think, right now. It's any form of flexion,
Tina,
any form of flexion, any amount, or any
through it.
form of flexion,
And or a small amount.
a small amount, not and or.
Oh, just
So show,
or a small
No,
and a small.
no.
no,
Yes.
show the,
All right, so number 14 should be any form of flexion, any amount, or any form of flexion, small amount.
Got it.
no,
That there's a difference in reading of that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Got it.
a small to no,
So
yeah,
some people
small
think
as
it's-
opposed, well, look, do you see,
That's what I
this
was
is what's in your move.
What's in your move? What's
All right,
in
you
Tina
see
just
on
put
the
up
far
there?
right,
No.
Yes.
Which,
what Tina just
Okay.
wrote up. The one on the left means a small to moderate,
Yes.
right,
Okay.
and the one to the right of that is a very small, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So then the question became, well, what if you just want to say flexion without implying an amount? And that's why Anne came up with the middle one. But that was the point.
So number 14 should read any form of flexion, any amount, which is how Peggy's been using it, or any form of flexion, a small amount, which is how it is in your move.
Right.
Any form of
And number
flexion, any
30
amount,
Any amount.
Yes,
and then any form, a small amount.
right.
Now, when you're saying the double X is a
Very
small amount of flexion,
Very small.
Very small.
Very small.
The single X is small and the double X is very small.
Because
meaning there's more flexion because you get smaller?
No. This is it's
Yes.
let's say from
Or
here
this.
to here. Say from here to here might be
Little
the
extension.
it might be the very small, and then let's say from here to here might be a small.
But I see what you're saying. A very
Right.
small amount of flexion means you're very flexed.
Right, so you're doing more action
Yeah.
of flexing. Right. That's
This
the way I
took
thought.
me years to pin Anne down on this. It made me crazy. And it's also the idea of motion and destination.
Yes, it is, definitely.
Which, yeah,
Which hasn't been clarified.
It's
Well-
based on the degrees.
yes,
One
it is.
degree of flexion is the single X, 2
Right,
degrees,
yeah,
3
right.
degrees are all
Right.
with the single X and dots. 4, 5, and 6 is with the double X. So the double X represents,
The most
A lot of
flex,
flexion.
destination oriented.
yeah. So you are, so it's not a small amount of flexion, it's you are very small, or it gets
Yeah,
very
right.
small.
Right.
Where you end up.
And it's at a greater degree of flexion.
It's destination oriented as opposed to these things, when you see them with this continuity
You think
flow
it's
and
motion.
that the duration, it feels like it's motion. And that's where the confusion is, I guess.
And what we decided, because Anne and I have gone around and around about this for 3 years, because I'm not happy with it. And so what we decided within the context of your move, because the general ideas of flexion and extension are first introduced in part 1 of the text, we decided to just leave them as is, use the duration line. They can be, that motion and destination is inclusive in that general use.
Okay.
I
And
think
then in
the
part
words-
2, so it could be do a flexed action, flexing. It could be either of those in terms of motion and destination. And then in part 2, I'm really pushing her now to rewrite the motion and destination chapter, where this idea of flexion and extension as destination, as motion, get explicitly teased apart.
So there's a way of
But I
saying
think, but
destination.
going back to what's on the board, Tina, I think there's another issue here besides motion destination. This issue of the words. The single X is a small amount of contraction. And the
Flexion.
double X
Flexion.
is flexion. And the double X would be a lot of flexion. Not small and very small. Because that's
Say it. What about
small
slight?
and very small.
Slight
Very
and
small
marked.
amount of flexion, you're not going to be very flexed. And the double X, we mean you are very
I
flexed.
talk about it as little and a lot.
Or slight and marked is what I think Anne actually said.
Slide and what?
Slight and marked.
But around this table, we were just talking about small and very small,
Which
and
is-
those words don't work.
Which were
No, they don't.
wrong.
Those words don't work.
Slight and marked is what, okay, slight.
It's this, do slight marked, and slight, flexion, marked,
Slight
flexion.
amount.
Do we want to add this to the chart? Is this verbiage?
Well,
I mean, I use a little and a lot. It's the easiest. It's the
little
most
and a
clear.
lot. Yeah, that's good.
You flex a little bit and then you flex a lot, you know, I mean, it's pretty.
That's good, that's fine, a little and a lot is good.
so we were using small and very small here, and that
That's
doesn't work.
good, thank you for bringing that up.
I always go for as easy as possible, and I always go for user-friendly.
Could
That's what drives
notion-
my thinking.
Could the notion of the question about whether this indicates progression or a destination be added to the chart? The question about it?
Just that we want to say that we don't know if it's, by this symbol, we don't know if it's destination or motion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is there
Do we just want to acknowledge
is there an
distinctions?
agreement about or
Destination or
disagreement?
motion in the other column.
Other, okay, right.
Other.
Yeah.
But
The other column.
it is a question.
I mean, I think of
I
it
mean,
as
in my mind, I
motion.
don't know the
Yeah,
answer.
yeah.
at this
Also,
point.
I just wanted to point out number 13, those symbols, they looked okay on the screen. I don't know why that third one got so elongated when I printed it out.
Which one?
No, we had to make
This is what happens when you start lengthening the symbols instead of using an action, a duration line.
Mira had to make that symbol. That's got the ad lib in that in the middle there. And it didn't look so long and stretched out and bigger than the others on the screen, so I don't quite know what happened.
Got it, okay. I was wondering about that, thank you
Yeah,
for clarifying that.
yeah, well, it wasn't like that until it printed out.
Okay, and number 17, I think we should just use the term rotation. That's what I want.
Yeah, that's me.
Which one? Number, sorry,
Well,
17?
over here under other word, what should be the generic term for, and I think any rotation is fine.
And number 18?
17.
And that's in 18.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Or just voting.
Okay,
That's all.
great. Super.
Maybe for 18, we should add any rotation. We've got rotation, but we don't have any rotation. So that's, I
That's a
think,
good
where we
idea.
need to put it.
Yeah, I agree.
But then it would be any turn, any revolution.
No, any rotation is what Peggy suggests. The generic term other people suggest for a rotation, turn, or revolution.
Okay. I am so grateful that you have the logic skills to start here. It melts my brain.
She's
I
brilliant.
love it.
She's brilliant.
Okay.
So 21, I vote for under D, the first symbol. I'm just voting, that's all. That's what we would teach.
This one too, you'll
The
want to
first one.
read the minutes when they come out. 'cause we
Okay,
had a lot of
I'm sure
discussion
I'm
on
not
it.
going to,
We
because I've had
won't,
the discussion many times,
21.
so it's going to take a little
we
bit.
won't go into it now, but there's good
And I've had
discussion.
discussion with
There's
both
good
of you guys.
discussion and at least,
How you doing, John? Okay. Okay? Okay.
21 should be what?
nothing, no change.
No change, I just.
She's just voting.
And then 28, I'm voting for this second one. The gestural pass.
Did you have anything to add to any of these, John? Or should we go on to something new?
Well, I'm very similar with Peggy and what she was saying, the symbol that we use for what she just talked about. Right.
We weren't meant to do that.
So if we go back to our movement alphabet page, which is where we were going through to get...
Well, I don't know.
Here, what did you find up in the case? Pass that on to John.
Thank you.
John, we were just going through some of the literature to try and go through this in a comprehensive way, and we didn't get very far into the first piece of literature that we started. So we've gone through any action, stillness, flexion, extension, rotation, and traveling. Our next one would be that symbol for direction.
And there's already sort of an issue surrounding that for number 1. What is center? What does center mean?
Right.
which
Yeah.
reference.
What, is this out of curiosity, would you, John and Peggy, have anything to say about whether you think that center means,
Are we talking about number one now, this symbol?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about the concept of center?
we're talking about the
Yes.
meaning of that
Both.
symbol?
Okay.
Does that symbol, or at least that's what I'm asking, but you could ask something else too, does that just denote standing in a neutral position, or could it
No,
also
it means place middle to me.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean,
And
what it
could-
means to me isn't even on this chart.
Me neither.
What does it mean?
Place
Place
middle.
middle.
In the line of gravity at middle level is what it means to me. And,
I mean, I can see a lot of these other things,
yeah,
I
I
just
could
hadn't
go
thought of
with
them.
a lot of them. I would use them. It's another one of those examples of having multiple definitions within a dictionary of the same word,
Although we have other symbols for
within
center,
context. Yeah.
you know, with
So,
What's that?
But that's
some of
all the body,
ones
what are those
with body,
connectivity organizations?
body organization symbols, yeah.
patterns of total body connectivity is what I call them, and I made up the symbols. So.
Right.
Let's call them that. Since
Is it this
To
one?
figure
They
it
don't
out.
have to be developmental.
Right.
But is that different from the symbol for a center direction?
Oh, definitely, totally.
Okay.
This is breath patterning, patterning from
Right.
breath.
Yeah.
Right.
We're not gonna get into that
No,
yet.
no,
We're-
it's not.
we're- Yeah.
Right.
Where's the,
But we should put place middle in here, don't you think?
Yeah.
Did you put that there?
I put place middle and I put in the line of gravity at middle level.
And that's a specific case of,
I wouldn't call this the center of gravity. I mean, I wouldn't call it.
never, no,
Never.
center of gravity is that big
Yeah, yeah,
blob.
yeah.
But what did you ask, Tina? You asked something, said something before about,
oh, Peggy just asked, are we talking about the concept of center, or are we talking about the symbol?
We're talking about this symbol right
this
now.
symbol.
Yeah.
Right now, we're talking
The
about this
meaning
symbol.
of the, and also talking about the symbol now for any direction.
Yeah, we're moving into that section, aren't we?
Right, but we jumped back to number one and we've added a couple things here. But it doesn't reflect at all what I think it means.
The only
Like what we
reason
got.
some of the.
No, the place middle does, but what we've got here doesn't at all.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And place middle
You need
can
to-
be, for instance, if you're using it in the Laban movement analysis space harmony scales, it may be reading spatial directions from your belly button center. That
Well,
might
we
mean
brought that up,
yeah,
too.
that might mean that.
Where,
What has the belly button center?
Yeah, I see that, yeah.
I mean,
because-
neutral position, neutral standing, neutral sitting, those all make
Yeah.
sense.
where the causes of axis is placed.
I think of it as also being in no direction. You know,
No
the,
direction, that should be on there.
Mm-hmm,
You
that's
know.
nice.
it's not up, it's not down, it's
No
not
s-
forward, it's not back, it's not side, it's in the center.
No specific direction,
Well, if you-
no specific direction
Well,
expressed.
I would think that more
No.
if it didn't have a middle
No direction.
dot in it. I would think if it were like that, without the middle dot, that it might be no direction.
That would mean, to me, would mean upward, middle, or downward.
Vertical
Yeah.
line.
As opposed to, just like you have a blank side
Because
direction
because you're seeing
here.
the shape of place being more important than the
Well,
level.
it's a blank symbol.
I think in no direction in the center, kind of.
No direction in the center is what you're
If you
asking.
saw
Yeah.
that symbol in a sequence, how would you then interpret it as meaning no, don't go anywhere? Is that what you're saying?
You mean in a sequence of space symbols?
I mean,
Or
it depends
anything.
what comes first,
Yes,
yeah, the context.
If you see what, it could be anything
I mean, if
before or
I'm doing
afterwards.
something and then I saw this, I would center myself.
Okay. And
Would you
and in
center
there-
yourself with coming directly back into this area with all of your limbs?
Not
or would it matter?
necessarily. I mean, I might bring them in here. To me, this is placement.
Right.
Yeah, right. I can see that.
In your move,
Interesting.
in your move, in both the old and the new, this is why, actually I brought this up, unless I misread them both, Anne says that symbol is should be
Which
read.
symbol?
One center, a symbol for center.
Place
not
middle. Place
a
middle.
dot in the middle.
Place middle.
Should be read as standing in a neutral position.
No.
And I don't understand, I think that it could be anywhere that you are. You had a nice way of putting it. That is, that expressive of centeredness. But in your move,
As one possible interpretation. Everything that you're saying in my conversations with Anne and my
So I
understanding
misunderstood them.
is in agreement. So I'm just making a note here to go back and look at that, because if that's
the way I
idea
read
that's
it.
coming across, then
Yeah.
that's not,
Okay.
it shouldn't
Okay.
be that
Or maybe
exclusive.
the way
It
I-
shouldn't be that exclusive.
Okay.
It's more of an
Mira.
inclusive idea. And the idea too that, you know, this can be read really generally for the body as a whole. If I'm talking about, oh, my body goes forward, and then my body goes up, and then I come back to center, and then I go down low, that it can be a really general, you
Well,
know,
she says if
no
you're,
direction.
if you're down low, and then you see this symbol, it means you should stand up and be in a neutral standing position.
in that particular context,
But the question is, if I'm in a low place,
if
if
the whole
I'm
thing is in a
sitting,
low
let's
place.
say I'm in a low place, okay, and the notation says sit. Now the next symbol says that. Let's say I'm like this, and then the next thing is that. I think I could do this. I could do this. I wouldn't do that, but I might go down, you know, but from what I'm reading, she's saying if you're down low and then she made a rule, and then the next symbol is the place center, you do this. And that's why
I think we need to look at the book and see exactly what it says
want me to
before
do
we
it?
can do that.
Well, I can tell you. I mean, the reason why it says that is because it's talking about, because where that information comes in the textbook, it's taking for granted, there's this implicit assumption being made that we're talking about the body in its fullest vertical kinesphere, in a standing sort of place. The idea of being on a different supporting situation is another layer. So this idea of place middle hasn't been addressed specifically in regard to what if you're sitting. But my understanding is that if I'm doing a sitting dance and I'm maintaining that sitting dance and I'm doing that same notation of what I was doing standing, I do forward and then I do back and then I come back to center and then I go to the right and then come back to center, it would mean within the context of what my situation is, that would be appropriate.
So it's context oriented.
Absolutely.
Well, even I would take it from where I was before. Like if I was standing and then I went to sitting, and the next symbol was place middle, it'd be in a sitting place middle. I would not come back up
That
to
would be
standing.
another development.
Right.
It'd be another layer.
Okay.
Well, if it's motif, you have, in my mind, you have, as long as you do what I say, you can do anything.
Right, and
So if you're revealing place middle, and you're revealing it in sitting level because you happen to be sitting before, that's totally fine.
But I could stand too, and that would be okay.
So again, it comes back to this issue. Are you going to have a rule, which it seems like what you're kind of leaning towards, and that is that our interpretation is slanted towards context, whatever that means, or is there not going to, is our interpretation or the way we're going to write not going to have that specified unless it's in your glossary? I would like to not have, this is my feeling, not to say that it's open to interpretation unless I put in the glossary, read this in the context. Not to have the rule be that the context dictates. It gets back to this notion of what is natural, what is context. Do you understand what I'm saying?
But that's motif.
But if you're
Why
sitting,
is that motif
but
to say
Charlotte,
a context?
if you're sitting here and you're told to go forward middle, are you going to have to stand up in order to do the forward
No.
middle? So why should you have to stand up to do the place middle?
You shouldn't.
She's saying that.
I'm saying that it shouldn't be that.
And
just said that you
it's
don't
not,
want
it's
it to
just
be
a
context.
misinterpretation of that information that's written.
Okay.
That's not what Anne means.
So she's saying that indeed, context is not a criteria for interpretation.
But see, Charlotte,
If-
I don't understand what you're saying, because you just said, when my example, it was context that told me where forward middle was, the fact that I was sitting.
Mhm.
So it is context. Now you're saying it's not context. So
I'm saying
totally
it could,
confused
I'm
what you're
saying that for the system, we should not have a rule that says that you have to interpret this on the
From
basis
some
of context.
Right.
If you,
I agree with you.
the
How else can
system
you-
should
That's what
not
Peggy
have
was
that
just
as a
saying
rule. That all that says is do place middle in your kinesphere. Now, if you want to have, say, an additional thing, do it within the context. In other words, you're sitting and then you have to glossarize that. I'm talking about what the rules should be for the system as a whole.
I'm completely
So that goes
confused
back
by
to
what
do
you-
whatever
So
you
you're
want as long as
saying-
you do what I
So
say.
you're saying that if it's not based on context, place middle would have to be here?
No,
No,
it
it could be
could
any
be
of
Could be
there.
either one.
It could
what
be
she's saying.
anything as long, it could be,
Oh, I see
it
what
could
you're
be,
saying.
it's, when I read Ann is
So that's the
saying.
option of
That's what
standing
you
up
want.
would be
Option.
there.
But there's always
Oh, I
going to
see
be
what you're saying.
context, because
Yeah.
if I'm here and it says go to place middle, if I go and sit down, I'm doing something that's back and low.
Yes,
That's motion
it's a different,
versus
what you
destination.
can,
Motion
too,
versus
yeah.
destination.
Right, but I mean, there's
Yeah.
always going to be
Interpreting-
context. You can't,
but my context if I write something and I haven't specified a context, I want to have the system say without specifying a context. You know, I could in the glossary say you should read this a certain way, or you should read it as though you were having a conversation, or you should, whatever it is. But that should not be built into the system to say, read
But
this
there's-
within
So wait,
your
can I
context.
repeat back to you what I'm
Wait.
hearing now? 'Cause I think I have a different understanding of what you're saying. Okay, so my example of standing up and doing forward is one way of interpreting center.
Right.
Or if I'm sitting down within this context, this would be coming back to center. But now what I'm understanding of what you're saying is that it shouldn't have to be context, it shouldn't have to be exclusively context defined, that if I have forward, come to a central place, and then go back, I should be able to have the option to stand up as an option.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. And I think that's fine, and so that helped me expand my previous explanation to be inclusive of that, because that makes
Right.
sense to me.
Yeah.
That I think that if you wanted somebody to stay seated, you would put those retention signs on the hips and say, stay seated during this whole reading, so you're establishing the context in that way, so that coming back to place middle would have to continue, would have to maintain that seated support.
Or say, this notation is about conversation between
that's
these
a
two
different
people.
kind of context. That's different.
Okay, well, that's what I thought you were talking about, but in either case, I would not want to have either of those limitations placed on the
Right.
system.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure that I agree with that. Because if I'm sitting and the next thing is forward middle, I could come off my sitting and do a forward middle
Right.
thing.
Yes.
But I wouldn't think that if I'm sitting and I go here, that I'm going forward